Within the last 24 hours, even though in the last week and a half, the civil war in Syria has rapidly changed, in the last 24 hours, it is even more rapidly changed. To the point where I don't even know if I'm going to release yesterday's video on my channel, because so much has changed since then that the dynamic is fundamentally different, and I don't want to just release it as is, right? So I'm going to figure something out. But that's how fast the situation is changing, is that within 24 hours, a video or a comment or a update on the war could become basically redundant. So within the last 24 hours, to just get across how much has happened, not one, not two, not three, but four regional capitals in Syria have fallen. And this is also while the Hayatir al-Sham advance from up north, from Idlib into Aleppo, down through Hama, and now towards Homs, continues to put pressure on what many people see as the last stand of the regime in Homs. So I don't know really where to get started. So I'm going to get started in the areas that are new, and then we'll go to the areas that we'll just continue to add some updates for. Now, let's just get it right out of the way. The big update that I was not expecting to be this rapid. I knew that there were rebel activity here. I knew that there were ambushes. I was seeing the reports of that. I was hearing about this checkpoint getting ambushed, this checkpoint getting ambushed. Heard about this village, having a rebellion after we ended stream. I was like, oh, and then I heard another village having a rebellion, and I saw some like pitter patter of splots earlier today. I think like 10 hours ago, I made a post about this like pitter patter of rebel activity. Here it is. This is me from, about 10, 11 hours ago. This is about 8 hours after we ended stream. And I was, the last comment I made on it was, oh, there's some, there's an ambush here, there's an ambush there. But then I moved on to the battle for Homs. Then I moved on to the possible SDF capture of Deir ez-Zor. Well, since then, this was it 8, 9 hours ago, okay? This is it now. The South is in complete revolt against the Assad regime. Now, this means that both the regional capital of Dara, which many people called the cradle of the revolution, as there was a lot of dissidents in Dara, and there was a battle for Dara that lasted many years as the FSA fought the Syrian Arab army for control of the city. Dara was the first to fall, and then soon after, a second regional capital of Al-Suida has also fallen, as you can see right here. So that's two regional capitals in the south that have rapidly fallen to, in large part, HTS, Hayatir al-Sham aligned rebels, but it's not just Hayatir al-Sham aligned rebels. A lot of the people here, and I want to get this across, are people who have been underground for almost like a decade, preparing, arming themselves, coordinating with people, communicating, and planning. Because ever since like 2020, 2021, a lot of violent rebel activity was just not really that plausible due to Assad's domination of Dara, the cradle of the revolution, and its suppressing of the FSA units there. It defeated them militarily, and so if they were to just throw out all of their rebels and like sympathizers with guns and fight the regime, well, then they would have nobody in the south, because at that period, the Russians would just bomb them, Hezbollah would go in and curb stomp them, and then they'd siege the Palestinian refugee camp again. And the reason I mentioned that is this is actually where the Assad regime, and I believe it was Hezbollah as well, but I'm trying to remember which organizations took part, sieged and starved Palestinians in a refugee camp in Dara. And so Dara has fallen very rapidly, not only because of, the appearance of the regime's weakness, not only because of the rapid advance of HTS tying up forces that had to go north in order to defend against the advance, but also because the people of Dara, as the many people in the south and many of these different villages and towns, have been waiting for a moment like this for quite a while and have been preparing for a moment like this for quite a while. Even if the international community and different Arab leaders in the region were ready to make peace with Assad, We're ready to normalize with Assad. We're ready for Assad to return to just being another leader in the Middle East after killing hundreds of thousands of his own people. Dara does not seem to agree with that opinion. Neither does al-Soida, neither does the city of course, Hama, neither does the city of Aleppo, and of course the city of Idlib. So the South is in full revolt. Now, when I say they're in full revolt, I don't just mean that they've taken up these cities and now they're in defensive positions. No. You don't understand. They're also advancing northward. You can see it right here that they're advancing along the same M5 highway that HTS is advancing to the south from. From the north from, as in they're going north to south. And what this means is that HTS, Hayat al-Sham, is advancing from the north after capturing the second largest city in Syria, and Aleppo, and then the fourth largest city in Syria, the city of Hama, and is now marching towards, again, the city of Homs, which many people say is the Assad regime's last stand. Why is the Assad regime's last stand? Well, now I would say it's even more of the Assad regime last stand. Well, before I would say, people are suggesting it might be the last stand of the Assad regime, but you don't know for sure. I now believe that it would probably be the last stand of the Assad regime. And the reason is simple. If they take Homs, the path to Damascus is clear. You just continue to go down the same M5 highway that they have been going down up to this point, and then you're in this capital of Damascus where Assad's palace lies. But now, there's also people advancing from the south, meaning that the Assad regime is fighting a war of two fronts. Well, technically more than two fronts, unless you discount the withdrawal, you count the withdrawal and say, and never mind, if they're withdrawing, then it's not a front that they're fighting on, but we'll get into that in a second. But this means they're taking attacks from the north, and they're taking advance from the south. And the attacks from the south doesn't have any major cities between them and Aleppo. It's just over there, up them and Damascus. It's just a straight shot. They get through these villages, they travel along the M5 highway, and they can get into Damascus. Now, to be clear, there are still Assadist loyalists in Damascus. And these Assadist militias and the Syrian Arab army in Damascus is setting up defenses. But what this would mean is that if the city of Homs was falling, or was to fall, while the south was advancing on the city of Damascus, the southern rebels, if this city falls, Homs, then Damascus will be attacked from two sides. And the way that Homs fell, the way that Hama fell, was by being surrounded on three sides, which then caused the Syrian Arab army's withdrawal. Now, there's not really anywhere to withdraw from in Damascus, so there might be, a kind of some sort of, we have to stand here and fight because we don't really have an option, and we've done so much to these people over 12 years, over a decade of the civil war, not even mentioning like the Hama massacre from 1982 done by Hafez al-Assad's brother Rifat, or any of the other stuff. Or the put down at the 2004 football protests and the Kurdish held territories up north. Putting all that aside, Damascus cannot handle being attacked from two sides. And if Damascus is attacked from the south and the north at the same time, which would be possible if Homs fell, then the city of Damascus would be put under siege, and the heart of the Assad regime would be within the grasp of the rebellion. Within the grasp of the Syrian revolution. That's the stakes. That's the situation. It was already dangerous for Damascus with the advance from the north. It was already dangerous, and they were already talking about Homs as a possible last stand opportunity before the city of Damascus. Now, with the advance from the south, that point is only more prudent. Mind you, I'm not even talking about the other effects of taking a city like Homs. If they take Homs, it will not be difficult to cross over to the border with Lebanon and then block off the Assad regime's M45 to M20 highway connection, which leads to the Alawite heartland of the coastline, Lakita Governorate and the Tartus Governorate, which also happens to have, as we've mentioned on the channel many times before, the Russian naval base in Tartarus, which gives the Russians access to the Mediterranean, which is one of the big reasons the Russians propped up the Assad regime in the first place. Now, as this is going on, and this is probably the most immediate threat to the Assad regime, this is not the only places where Assad has taken losses. Again, I said four regional capitals have fallen. We've only talked about 2 here. Another regional capital fell. Deir ez-Zor. Deir ez-Zor has fallen to the Syrian Democratic Forces, otherwise known as the SDF, which is made up of a bunch of different militias, most notably the YPG, the YPJ, which are Kurdish-dominated militias, the YPG being for men and the YPJ being a women's militia, as well as different Arab militias that have came under the banner of the Syrian Democratic Forces. They crossed the Euphrates and took Deir ez-Zor and are currently still fighting and clashing in these areas, trying to take over these different villages. Now, at the same time, not everybody in these villages want to be ruled by the Syrian Democratic Forces. A lot of these people see the SDF as Kurdish-dominated and therefore for Kurdish interests. And, I mean, it's not to say that the SDF is, that's completely untrue. Because there is some truth to that. Well, no, I'm not going to say that's not true, because I think the SDF has a lot of problems with, locking up of dissidents, locking up of political opponents. It's had some bad issues with local tribal leaders and local communities, which is even sometimes broken out into shooting wars. And I think that is probably where a lot of the tension lies. Not to only mention the fact that the SDF is dominated by Kurdish rights, Kurdish activism, etc. And so some of these villages, some of these towns probably don't feel necessarily represented, but also, putting that aside, ISIS is active in the desert around here. So the way that ISIS has been, kind of hanging out since they've lost all their territorial holdings, since the ISIS caliphate collapsed in on itself and al-Baghdadi was, how did Trump put it? He died like a dog, he died like a dog. The way that these fighters have operated is that they hide in holes. Yeah, I mean, I don't know how else to put it. They have holes in the middle of the desert where they have some guns, they have some supplies, and they've just been waiting out for years because they know that they can't take on the Syrian Arab Army. Oh, well, maybe now they can, but they can't take on the SDF. They can't take on any of these other groups that are too scattered. They don't have enough supplies. And so these diehards who live for nothing but war and jihad and, fighting for the ideology of Daesh, they've been hiding in holes for years, waiting for the opportunity to strike. Now, when the Turks invaded northeastern Syria to fight against the Kurds, when they did that, that caused a lot of chaos. And one of the reasons I was very, very against it, not only because the Syrian National Army has a bad record of war crimes, they executed Kurdish politicians, they would try to sell the dead bodies of people back to their families instead of just returning it to them by calling them off of the phones of the dead. They just not a fantastic human rights record. There's been multiple documented instances of the Syrian National Army taking former ISIS fighters and putting them and giving them guns, giving them weapons, and sending them back into the fray. So I'm not the biggest fan of these operations, but another big reason why I thought it was a bad idea is because the SDF had to then take their forces that had been focusing primarily on anti-ISIS operations and trying to keep places like these massive prisons where they have tons and tons and tons of ISIS detainees and possible ISIS detainees. There has been some reports that not necessarily everybody in there is ISIS, and the human rights record of how those prisoners necessarily be treated and the fairness of trials, not exactly Gucci, as I guess the youth would put it. But the point is, the chaos that it caused and the diversion of troops meant that ISIS had opportunities to assassinate village elders. They had opportunities to spread propaganda and leaflets and try to intimidate locals, and also do terror attacks. And so, I think we're going to see a repeat of that. As the Syrian Arab Army pulls out of these areas, pulls out of Deir ez-Zor, pulls out of this land. And as you can see, all of this, nobody really has a firm grasp of this very sparsely populated desert region of Syria. ISIS could try to take advantage. And you can see these black spots here are reported ISIS activity, where ISIS is reported to be active in the country. And so it wouldn't be too surprising to me if these ISIS sleeper cells not only maybe launched terror attacks or assassinated more village elders now south of the Euphrates River, but also possibly tried to take over a village or two, maybe grab some hostages, or do, just extortion of the local population to try to help fund their movement. Point is, ISIS profits off of chaos, and the chaos that the Turks caused in northeastern Syria allowed them a resurgence, and now the chaos of the Assad regime's collapse could allow them a resurgence as well. And when I say resurgence, I don't mean they're going to take a bunch of territory and hold on to it. I don't believe the international community would let that happen. The coalition forces that are in SDF territory, like supporting them against the Assad regime, as they have supported them to take Kasham, which is where the Russians and the Wagner group launched their famous failed assault on SDF positions, where they got, well, to put it lightly, butchered. I could see the coalition immediately, if they start taking over villages, resuming heavy bombing of any area that the ISIS controls. And every single faction hates them, and nobody wants to make a deal with them. So I think really it's a question of how much damage I think ISIS can cause, not a question of can ISIS go back to where they were before. That's not to say that they couldn't become a long-term problem. Whatever deal is made or whatever the borders look like, once the situation somewhat stabilizes and it isn't as flexible, I'm just saying that it cannot return to where it was like before, but this is a threat we certainly have to look out for. But yes, Deir ez-Zor was captured by the SDF, making it the third regional capital that the Syrian Arab army abandoned and or got captured from them today. And you can actually see the Syrian Arab army running away, just straight up withdrawing. Here is their checkpoints that they used to have, completely empty. They gave it up basically without a fight. They fought for across the river, but once they lost the stuff across the river, they skedaddled. I'm trying to look for, there was actually a video of like entire tank corps and armored vehicles being transported away as fast as possible. And I think that might be another reason why they are abandoning this side of the country. It might be the same reason that they abandoned northwestern Syria back around 2013, 2014, as ISIS was dominating the country, which caused a lot of these different Kurdish communities, not just Kurdish communities, but a lot of these communities up here, to pick up arms to defend themselves against ISIS. The reason they did that is they were desperate to defend the coastline. They were desperate to defend Assad's power base. They were desperate to defend the financial power base of the regime. And they wanted to make sure that like the capital and the political power base stayed secure. And so they withdrew from this area, abandoned that side of the country to ISIS, and went to defend the coastline. And now, I think we're seeing the same thing, where the Assad regime is pulling out of Deir ez-Zor, taking their tanks, taking their artillery, taking their whatever, pulling it back, hopefully from their mind, through this road all the way back to Homs, or all the way back to Damascus for either the last stand at Homs or possibly to defend against the southern advance in Damascus. So it's not like some could say it's a complete withdrawal and they're all just going to go home and they're already abandoning the Assad regime. But on the other hand, I think it could also be that they are bringing these supplies back to the capital, back to Homs, in order to resupply them with tanks and munitions, because they've lost a lot. They've lost a lot in the last few days. They had to abandon a lot of modern T-80 and T-90 tanks and some T-72 tanks and other tanks from Aleppo and Hama. They've had to abandon some artillery guns. They've had to abandon some air defense systems. They've had to abandon tons of different armored vehicles, just regular run-of-the-mill military vehicles, and a lot of ammunition, equipment, guns, etc. And so they need to get whatever they can right now. And reportedly, the Assad regime is basically calling regional leader after regional leader after regional leader, trying to see who could intervene on his behalf, either with intelligence or forces. And if not intelligence and forces, then maybe supply him weapons. And so far, he's come up largely empty-handed. There have been reports that Hezbollah have crossed the border over from Lebanon in order to support the Assad regime, like we talked about yesterday. But the numbers we're talking about are not the thousands and thousands of thousands that were able to help, siege rebel-held cities, including Palestinian refugee camps. No, this time we're talking about maybe in the hundreds. The Russians, as we talked about many times before, are currently preoccupied in Ukraine. The war in Ukraine is taking not like a bunch of separate weapons that are not directly tied to this, and because sometimes you can have one war where you're going to need a bunch of precision missiles, but another war we're going to need a bunch of artillery shells. And so therefore, even though you have two wars, they both need different things, and so maybe you can supply at the same time. No. What the Assad regime needs right now is stuff like glide bombs. What the Assad regime needs right now is aircraft. What the Assad regime needs right now is maybe stuff like artillery. And all of this is stuff that the Russians are using en masse in amounts that Europe has not seen since the Second World War right now to invade Ukraine and try to conquer the cities of Chasiv Yar, Kramatorsk, Toretsk, and all across the country, just different cities and different locations. And so the Russian government, from what reports are indicating, and mind you, like some of these reports, like it's from like Sky News Arabia, right? But I can't like confirm this 100%. It's from one news source, but not another news source. And so much stuff is happening rapidly that it's really hard to know what is truth and what is fact, what is fiction, etc. Point is, though, Sky News Arabia is reporting that the Assad regime has been told by the Russians that due to the fact that they have, and I quote, other strategic priorities, or something along those lines, they are limited in the amount of support they can offer the Assad regime at this period of big problemos, okay? So I do not think that we're going to get mass Russia. I mean, I said this before. I thought this was likely before, because as important as Syria is for Russia's access to the Mediterranean, for the air bases, for having an ally to the region, and also helping the Iranians continue to confront the United States and have the United States, be tied up in et cetera, XYZ, they need, and politically, they need psychologically, they need in every other way from the eyes of the Kremlin to conquer Ukraine more. They've lost more lives there. It's more tied to Russia's direct history than Syria is, even though the Russian alliance with the Assad family, going back to Hafez al-Assad, goes all the way back to the Soviet Union. The relationship that Russia has with Ukraine goes back a little bit further from when Catherine the Great was conquering lands here from, the Khanate and fighting against, the Ottomans. Point is, the history here is deeper. The cost, financial cost is deeper, the psychological cost is deeper, and the human cost is deeper. They've put a lot more on the line in Ukraine. And also, the time window is really bad for the Russians because Donald Trump's coming in office on January 20th. And if they want to have the best hand for any possible negotiations, they need to push the Ukrainians out of Kursk, which still control 60% of the territory that they captured from the Kursk Oblast. The Russians have been able to push them out of 40%, but certainly not all of it. And there's a ton of burnt out armored vehicles strewn about Kursk, tons of, bodies making fertilizer, to put it bluntly, from Russian assaults. Now, the Ukrainians are taking immense damage too. I read the reports from Ukrainians in Kursk, and a lot of these are like really good units. These aren't like some ragtag militias or territorial defense units that don't know what they're doing. These are some decent units, and they're describing it like hell on earth. Endless wave after wave after wave of Russian assault. Now, I think sometimes people just look at Russia like a massive blob and they can just like spam soldiers forever and ever, but they can't. And even if they could, you can't spam tanks, you can't spam armored vehicles, and you can't spam jets forever and ever. Those need to be constructed. And they're not making tanks or BMPs or any of these vehicles that they're using at a fast enough rate to replenish them. That's not to say they're going to run out tomorrow, but that's to say if the war continues at the pace that it is currently, by the end of 2025, they're going to have a problem. They're going to have a real problem, and they're going to be digging deeper and deeper into the reserves. And don't just trust me. Don't trust me. Go look at the satellite photos of their stored facilities all across the country, and there's these open fields where they store tanks, where they store BMPs, and you can see slowly more and more and more of these tanks, more and more and more of these BMPs, more and more of these vehicles are disappearing. And not every vehicle in these fields are even really usable. Some of them are so broken down because they haven't been properly stored and they've been left out in the open since the collapse of the Soviet Union. And so they're not in the best condition. And so the best thing you can get out of some of these vehicles, if you can get anything out of them at all, is not just like scrap metal, but maybe like a gun turret here, an optic sight there. The point is, the Russians under immense pressure right now. And so, does the Russians really want to send the Assad regime a bunch of new tanks and vehicles after seeing them abandon all their positions in Aleppo, abandon all the positions in Hama, get overrun in Dara, Deir ez-Zor, and Al-Sawada, and all these different places, and now they're going to hand them more equipment to lose to the rebels? I mean, the Russians are have to make a difficult decision here. Yes, they've fought hard with Wagner soldiers and mercenaries and bombing. I mean, really brutal bombing. I mean, I remember the report of 4 hospitals in 12 hours, even though that record might have been broken within the last week and a half. With I'd have to go back and check, but I believe it was 5 hours and 24 hours. It's not 12 hours, but a lot of hospitals getting bombed. Point is, the Russians are busy, and they're busy with stuff that's probably immediately more important for the security of the state, at least from the mind of the Kremlin. The security of the regime, certainly. And so the Russians cannot divert the resources that they want to try to stop these advances. Now, point is that doesn't mean that they haven't, tried to bomb these areas. They are bombing these areas. They're bombing the northern countryside of Homs. They're bombing everywhere where the rebels are advancing, doing anything they can to try to stop the advance. Now, this is not only, of course, hurting the advancing troops, but it's also killing a lot of civilians, as Russian bombing has a long record of doing in the Syrian civil war. So right now, the Assad regime cannot call upon large swaths of Hezbollah fighters, maybe a few hundred at most. And we're also getting reports of, weapons storage facilities across the country getting bombed, both for Hezbollah, getting bombed by Israel, and the possibility of Russian storage facilities also getting bombed. And that's something I would be very interested in, to see if the American government or other governments, before the Assad regime or the Russians can withdraw all their equipment from the country when collapse fully sets in, whether they're going to blow up those storage facilities so that equipment cannot be redeployed to Ukraine, because if it is withdrawn from Syria, that's immediately where it is going to go. So this is not the only places that advances are happening, though. It's not just Homs. It's not just the south. It's not just Deir ez-Zor and all this territory here that's also getting captured across the Euphrates, all this territory that was abandoned. Also, the small pocket here of rebels where the American government has set up a military base, which has prevented the Assad regime from cracking down on it, because what are they going to do? Assault an American military base? Yeah, go Google the Battle of Qashm if you want to see how that goes. They have started advancing too. And they've captured some territory here, some villages here, and are now advancing on this road. I can't
help but compare this to the U.S. pulling out of Afghanistan in 2019.
I mean, you could, yeah, to some extent, you might be able to compare it to that. You can really compare it to that. You could compare it to when the Soviet Union pulled out of Afghanistan, just like 20 or 30 years before. You could compare it to maybe the withdrawal from Vietnam. You could compare it to, any time that another country in government that was propping up a smaller country in government that could not stand up on his own 2 feet leaves, the pillars go under, they collapse, and the regime collapses. And that's what it looks like right now, is that because of the moment where the Iranians are tied up with the Israelis and the Russians are tied up with the Ukrainians, they cannot give Assad the amount of support that they did before to prop him up. But as I was saying here, this little pocket has now also sprung out, and they've captured some villages here, and now they're attacking this road right here, which also, interestingly, is the road from Deir ez-Zor to Assad-controlled territory. And I'm wondering, I mean, they could have taken this other road, and I think that would be a safer pathway to Homs and then down to Damascus. But if they're not careful, they're gonna, I mean, it's probably gonna happen very soon. They're gonna overrun Palmyra, and then they're gonna cut off the Assad regime from any forces remaining out in this chaos that is out in northeastern Syria. Now, this isn't it. This isn't all the Assad regime has lost. I know it's a lot. I know we've talked about them losing a lot, but we're still not done. They've also lost multiple cities that have been surrounded by SDF-controlled territory for quite a while. So this area right here, this is the 4th regional capital that the Syrian Arab army, the Assad regime, has lost today. So if you're kind of confused as to how the Syrian Arab army kept these cities for so long, the reason is simple. They made deals. They made deals with the oh, I think this is the regional capital. Sorry, I'm trying to figure out if this was a regional capital. I think they might both be regional capitals. I forget. Point is, they've lost a lot of regional capitals today. Okay, I'm losing track of how many regional capitals have fallen. But they made a deal with the SDF to allow the Assad regime to keep their troops and to keep their bases here, as long as they don't fight. And the Syrian Democratic Forces have made a few agreements with the Syrian Arab Army around things like this. This is also the same reason why the SDF was able to have positions around Tal Rifat before they had to pull out under the pressure of the SNA, the Syrian the Syrian National Army's advance, which is heavily backed by the Turks. And if the Turks have one interest in Syria, it's no Kurdish independence, no Kurdish independence, no Kurdish independence, no Kurdish independence, and nothing that even smells like the Kurdistan Workers' Party, which of course the SDF have deep ties to. And so they've lost cities here, they've lost cities here, they have lost cities here, they lost cities here, they lost cities here, they'd be in advance now from this direction. The Assad regime is collapsing on every front. The Assad regime is being attacked from every front and is under pressure from every front. From the north, from the south, and from the east now. Whether you count Deir ez-Zor, which is probably just going to be the SDF trying to stabilize this area, or, better yet, the FSA here, which is now capturing these positions from the Assad regime. Where they took it from both Assad regime forces and Iranian militias, the few that are still fighting in the country. Now, that's not to say that the Iranian militias are going to stay till the end and they're going to fight in the streets of Damascus. It's really hard to say because it seems like a decent amount of them kind of, well, understand what the situation is like. Here is some people who are aligned with the IRGC, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, and the militias that they back and their political factions, just straight up crying at a shrine.
حال هوای ظاهرای حضرت رقیه آخرین نگاه به حرم خانم
So the reason they're crying is they don't think they're going to be able to return to these shrines once the rebels take over, which, I mean, if you're associated with the IRGC in any way, that's probably true. That is probably true. Now, I do want to make sure that me talking about the IRGC not being welcome is not taken as glibness towards the possibility of religious minorities being prosecuted by either the Syrian National Army or Hayat al-Sham, even though Hayat al-Sham has really talked a big game about, being, we now stand with DEI here at Hayat al-Sham. Some of you might remember us from our wild days back in Al-Qaeda. Well, we've changed a little bit since then. We all grow up. And I'm not kidding you. That is the position of al-Juwani. I know it sounds silly, but that's the position of al-Juwani. And considering the pace of the Civil War, we better hope that it's not a completely bluff. Okay? Now, by the way, you can tell that the Syrian Southern Rebellion is for real because Wikipedia is acknowledging it. My gosh, man. It's a complete collapse in every direction. It's a complete collapse in every direction. When I titled today's stream, I was not being hyperbolic. Assad regime collapsing in every direction. What direction are they not collapsing in? I guess the border with Lebanon has yet to collapse. There is yet to be a rebellion in the Russian naval base. I guess that would be it. But no, they're collapsing in every direction. And I don't think that there's going to be a sizable intervention to stop it at this point. And even if there was, could they get there fast enough? If Homs falls within the next 24 to 72 hours, depending upon whether HDS can, encircle the city, force a retreat, or push into it, or cause a retreat, depending on what amount of the defenders are forced conscripts, what amount are like Alawite diehard militias that are going to fight till probably the end, or they're going to be Iranian-backed militias that, are fighting here for, keeping up the axis of resistance, as they call it, across the region. Now, I want to look at a few videos from all these historic moments because we're witnessing a ton of history at the moment. This is a statue of Bashar al-Assad's father, Hafez al-Assad, in the cradle of the revolution in Dara, being toppled after the city was liberated by, taken over by, whatever word you want to use, by the rebels down south. Many people, including many Arab rulers in the region, never thought it would happen. But look, man, look, I've said this for a while on the channel, and I still believe it today, as I believed it a year ago, as I believed it a year before that. I remember telling it to Lonerbox when I was in Scotland. I remember telling it to other people before this, and I got some resistance on this and some reactions of disbelief. I do not believe there will ever be a chance at peace in Syria until the Assad regime is gone. I don't. And the reason I do is because he's had 12 to 13 years to stabilize the country. And the way he's chose to go about it is through no amount of compromise, no amount of sitting down with the table with the rebels. And so far, we still don't hear of any offer from the Assad regime for compromise with the rebels. Not that they would possibly even take it at this point. I mean, would they? Would they not? I heard that the Turkish foreign minister was talking to his foreign counterpart saying, you know, it'd be good if the Assad regime, you know, went and talked to the rebels and tried to make a settlement. But we have heard no updates about that. And so instead of trying to find compromise at the start of the revolution, when it was largely peaceful protest, he decided to go to the streets of Hama, the same place where Hafez al-Assad, his father's brother Rifat, did the massacre, the 1982 massacre of Hama, killing 25 to 40,000 people in order to put down a 1 to 2,000 strong Muslim Brotherhood rebellion in the city. Or the 2004 football protest that was put down with force, or the many, many other acts of suppression, the torture centers, the corruption, the state police, any of these things that, or issues that Syrians cared about, that Assad, when he took power, as, hey, look, he's the Western doctor, he was an eye doctor in Great Britain, he's going to come, he's going to bring reform, you know, he's going to be different, he's going to bring humanitarian values. And, you know, in his first speech when he took power, after Hafez al-Assad died and his older brother tied his car around a tree, was, because his older brother was originally supposed to take power, was that he was going to confront corruption. And then he just went into the same structures of power of his father, listened to the old guard, listened to the advice of his mother, who told him to never compromise. And now here we are. I mean, I don't know what the divergent point, because I don't know if Assad was always like this, as in Bashar al-Assad, Hafez al-Assad, but Bashar al-Assad, I don't know if he was like this before when he was an eye doctor and he was trying to heal people for a living. Or if this is something where the position in office corrupted him, or if it was from his youth and stuff he took from his father, or whatever it was. But he was uncompromising. I think one crucial point would probably be in the mid-2000s, when the international community, the United Nation and the world, was demanding that the Syrian regime pull its troops out of Lebanon. And the Syrian regime was saying, no, we don't want to pull our troops out of Lebanon. Many in the Assad family saw it as, particularly Assad's mother, saw it as part of Hafez al-Assad's legacy. You know, the fight against Israel, and here's our presence in Lebanon as we're the defenders against the Israelis, and you know, and we're here. But the Lebanese didn't necessarily want them there, and the Lebanese government was looking towards, you know, not keeping them there. And how did the government respond? Well, they responded by probably assassinating their politicians, which only made the situation much worse. And then they had to withdraw from Lebanon anyway. But Bashar al-Assad's mother hated this. She despised it. She despised the withdrawal from Lebanon. She thought it was a moment for Bashar that discredited the legacy of his father, which what she saw as her project to preserve his legacy from behind the shadows, influence the family from behind the scenes. And once he gave up Lebanon, I think maybe there was well, I don't think he was particularly a nice guy in 2004. That's when he was putting down the Kurdish protests in the Northeast. But I think that might have been a divergent point where he got the message, you know, don't compromise. Don't compromise. Compromise is bad. It's a bad idea. This was a failure. I don't want to. I can't give up Lebanon and then give up this as well later and compromise again back in 2011, 2012. And I think back, you know, in 2015, 2016, 2017, 2018, 2019, as the situation was more favorable for the government And, you know, the brink that they reached in 2014 was averted by the intervention of the Russians and the Iranians through Hezbollah and other militias and Soleimani. I think that he got the message that, oh, this was the right strategy. Hardline, hardline, hardline. I think it's the same reason that he opened fire on the protesters instead of, you know, approaching them for any compromise. And I mean, the reason they were protesting back in 2011, I think, you know, it was the middle of the Arab Spring. I don't know what he expected. I don't know what I mean, eventually, yes, it was going to eventually reach Syria, but then they ended up mowing down protesters thinking that was going to put it down. But I guess if all you know is that, I mean, that's all you're going to do. But to many, it was the lighting of a tinderbox. And so if Assad has this type of decision making, you know, after his regime detains and murders children, and then gives their and tortures them, gives their bodies back to the families, tells them you can only have the body back if you bury it quickly. That information gets out. Of course, it was going to cause chaos. Of course, it was going to cause outroar and possibly rebellion. And if Assad made these types of decisions at all of these crucial turning points, immediately, even if Assad captured every inch of the country, he reaches another turning point. What is to say we don't just enter a second Syrian civil war? When Assad's 65, because he's currently like 59 going on 60. And so, I mean, my position has been not that, hey, this is the faction that needs to win for, you know, Syria to be stable, or this is the faction that needs to win for this or that or that. I just do not see how the country was ever going to stabilize ever, and not saying it's going to stabilize in the near future either, while Assad was in Damascus. And even if it did, how long? Because 1 to 2 years and then another rebellion once they put down another protest with machine guns is not really peace all that much. I would also say the mass systematic torture centers and detainment and extrajudicial killings is also not very peaceful. But I guess most people can look past that and call that peace because of just the scale of this killing. Either way, that's a belief I still hold today. And I think we're starting to see that take root, because it can't be that the Iranians and the Russians are just permanently propping up Assad. The Russians get preoccupied somewhere else. Maybe it's not Ukraine. Maybe there's a full revolt in Kazakhstan instead of a partial revolt like there was last time when they pulled away the fuel subsidies. Maybe there's a revolt in Belarus. Maybe there's another invasion of Georgia. For whatever reason, they might get preoccupied. Same thing with the Iranians. Let's say there's a civil war in Iraq, and they have to funnel weapons to the Shia Iraqi militias that they back, like the Popular Mobilization Forces, which there's been some rumors, and this is really maybe like the biggest lifeline that Assad could get at this point, would be large columns of PMF troops crossing the border. But I also don't see exactly where they would cross. I guess they could cross in this desert, and if there's enough of them, and if they go quick enough that they might be able to make it to Assad-controlled territory. But I mean, you know, this little pocket is now active, but that's like the last, you know, maybe lifeline that could be thrown at them. But I don't even know if that's particularly likely, not at this speed. But what if there's a civil war in Iraq and the Iranians get preoccupied? Or a war with Israel, and you know, right now tensions are pretty high, and they're preoccupied as they are now. You cannot forever just be dependent upon foreign powers for your own stability. I mean, it may be interchangeable alliance structures to stop invasion. That's one thing. But in order to keep stability within your own country, because you just can't keep it together, this is how you get situations like Afghanistan. That's how you get situations like Vietnam. And that's now how you get situations like Syria. We got some other videos I wanted to check out here. Here is Dara in 2011 at the start of the revolution. And here it is now, 13 years later. Man, it's history, man. We're watching it in real time, and history's a lot faster than I was prepared for. And by the way, they are advancing north. As you can see here, they are advancing northwards, taking up their different checkpoints and military sites as they advance northward towards Damascus. I don't know how quickly they'll reach Damascus, if they'll wait for HTS to try to take Homs or what's going to happen, but they are advancing northward. And the updates are happening so fast. By the end of this segment, there will be new places that have been captured in the meantime that we have just straight up missed. Here is a picture in Dara, by the way. Just an interesting picture. Here is, by the way, this is another thing that's going to really be a bane for the Assad regime. One of the big pitches from Assadists, whether it's Syrian Partisan Girl or anybody that wanted to defend Assad is a defender of minorities. Now, go ask the Kurds that, and I think they'll disagree. Go ask some other minority groups, and I think they'll disagree. But an interesting thing here is the Druze, which is definitely a religious minority in Syria, one that was that the ISIS thought were such heretics that they needed to be massacred in the same way that they were massacring much of the Kurdish communities. They are also rebelling. They have taken up arms against Hafez al-Assad. Sorry, I see his head getting the shoe treatment, and I immediately thought Hafez was alive again. But no, not all Druze necessarily, but there's not unanimity in these minority groups. Look, you can see the sense in an Alawite being fearful of reprisals due to how closely tied they are to the regime. But there have been multiple instances where either Druze or other Shia communities in the country have decided, as the rebels have advanced and they've reached these villages, they peacefully call them and they say, look, we see the writing on the wall. We're not huge fans of Assad's around here. You can take the village with no problem. We will not resist if you promise to not hurt anybody, respect our local customs, etc., etc. And so far, the rebels have, in basically every instance, I don't really know as much about the SNA, but when it comes to, the advance on Assad regime-controlled territory, they've agreed. They've largely agreed. And they've taken up these cities and towns without a fight, which then allows them to not only preserve manpower and firepower, but also possibly pick up new fighters along the way from some of these people who are now joining them against the regime, because it's a lot better to be on the winning side than the losing side. And Hayat al-Sham has made a lot of statements to try to signal that, hey, look at us now, we're inclusive, we believe in the DEI, and we have a lot of trans black speechwriters and social media stars. Okay, I'm kidding, but the point is that they're pitching it as Al-Julani, the leader of the HTS's, Hayat al-Sham's pitch is Syria's always been a multicultural country with many different peoples living together for hundreds of years. There's no reason that even under the type of government that they would like to see, which they're explicit about, would be Islamist, could not include them. Now, whether or not you believe it or not, due to Al-Julani's history with Al-Qaeda and ISIS, which he now, that was when I was young. Weren't we all crazy in our young days? Which I'm not kidding, that's his pitch. I know it sounds silly, but that's his pitch. I mean, if you're facing the advancing soldiers and you're hearing that pitch and you don't want to go and you fight, but seeing the civil war for 13 years, it makes sense that a lot of these groups would say, you know what, fine. Not to mention, nobody in Syria likes the corruption of the Assad regime. Nobody likes the fact that drug smuggling is now propping up Bashar al-Assad. Nobody likes that. And so there's other reasons outside of just sectarian divides, but issues that unites all Syrians as a people, that they have problems with the Assad regime. Assad came into power saying he needed to crack down on corruption, and then he didn't. These are things that he said that he knew that Syrians had problems with, and he didn't do it because he didn't want to challenge either the old guard in Syria or the power structures. And so all the little bits of reformist talk here, reformist talk there, quickly became him sliding into the habits of his father. You know what they say, the apple does not fall far from the tree. Here is another clip of Druze rebels tearing down the Assad regime. They seem excited. Here is also some stuff from Dara showing the regime pulling out. So to be clear, in Dara, it wasn't just that there was a rebellion. It was also that once there was a rebellion, the Assad troops in the region and the Assad-aligned militias pulled out. So it wasn't just they were completely pushed out of the region through fighting only. If that was the case, it probably would have taken longer for them to grab all that land. But these types of things have a momentum of their own. We were talking about the SDF taking over these locations around here, you know, around these areas. Around here, I got a video right here of them celebrating after taking full control of the city after years of being surrounded. Mind you, this is, you know, again, this is the fourth regional capital they lost in a day. Oh, and I didn't say this earlier, but Deir ez-Zor is the largest city, another one captured by the SDF, is the largest city in eastern Syria. So they've lost the second largest city, they've lost the fourth largest city, they lost the stuff that was surrounded by the SDF, but they held out for years. They've lost the largest city in eastern Syria, they've lost the cradle of the revolution in the south, Dara, al-Thuraida. Sorry, I pronounce it wrong. I pronounce it silly every time. It's fun to say, but sorry, so many different names, so many different places. It's been a while since I've checked into Syria. I've been in Ukraine for a bit. I'm still, you know, trying to figure out Shevchenko Avenue, you know. Point is, though, they're collapsing on every front. I don't know how else to describe it. Here's some more celebrations in SDF-controlled territory in the northeast of the country. Oh, also, I saw some some Turkish people in chat earlier, like posting like gray wolves. And by that I mean like there was just like one guy. You're a fascist, and you suck. I don't have anything else to say about that. Sorry, if anybody's throwing up this around me, they're not my homie. That's all I'm saying. Man, history in the making. And, you know, it all ends where it all started. The doctor has to go. For those of you who do not know why this graffiti is of some significance, is it was this graffiti that led to the the grabbing of these children. And when I say children, I mean people who were like 14, you know, really young kids. Were taken who did this graffiti, tortured by the regime, and their bodies were then returned to their families. And this is not really disputable, the fact that they were tortured. They've posted, I mean, many of the torturers posted videos of it, and it's publicly available online. And the regime also admits to shooting many of these kids. But they do dispute the fact that they castrated one of those children, a 14-year-old, even though the family says that they did. Now, if you're interested in how maybe the Wagner group might be taking this, or how all those people who fought for the last 13 years on behalf of Bashar al-Assad might be taking this from the international allies of them, namely the Russians, I wanted to show you Fighter Bomber. Now, Fighter Bomber is a pro-Russian source on Telegram. He is a pro-war military blogger who, as you know, War Translated notes, is usually a lot more chipper than many of the other doomeristic types. That's not to say he never says this is bad, this is bad, this is bad. He's just not one to usually doom scroll, notice, so to speak. But I wanted to read you the portion that he wrote today on Syria. The situation in Syria is still too uncertain to make any solid predictions, but it can be stated that the situation has reverted to something similar to 2015, with one notable difference: the emergence of drones. Drones are a factor that no one anywhere has yet learned to reliably counter. The rest of the Islamist weaponry is not significantly different in quality or quantity from what they had in 2015. Their personnel remain the same. Well, okay. So I do admit that the drones, that what he's saying about the drones here is true, but it's not completely different, because there were drones being used by rebels and ISIS back earlier in the war. It's just they were a lot more rudimentary, where ISIS would take like a tuna can, or not a tuna can, but like a tomato can. They'd cut out the bottom, and then they'd stuff a grenade in it. Then they'd attach the bottom, have it like barely hold onto the can, attach it to a string, tied to a mechanism on the drone, then fly that drone over an enemy position, then press the button, the mechanism turns, the string moves, pulls the bottom of the tomato can out, the grenade falls, hits the enemy. Pretty rudimentary. Very kind of, you know, they kind of MacGyvered their military solution around these drones. Now, we're seeing FPV drones strapped with RPGs ramming into Syrian Arab army tanks. This is different. This is different. This is not the same thing that we would see from the rebels before. This is a different type of drone activity. And I will say, and I've said this a few times before, and I'm not going to say that I know this for sure, because I can't know this for sure, but if you guys remember the Jack Textera leaks, that was that National Guardsman who decided to post a bunch of stuff on the Thug Shaker Discord channel, which is just like a meme Discord channel of national, you know, documents of, you know, classified documents that got him arrested, and it revealed a bunch of stuff. But one of the few things it did reveal was that the Zelensky government was considering going to Syria and helping the rebels against the Assad regime to then strain the Russians, so they had to take troops from Ukraine, move them over to Syria, and therefore remove some pressure against the Ukrainians. Now, we don't have 100% proof that this is the case, but I will say that I remember when, and the Russians have supported, through the Wagner Group, the Rapid Support Forces, led by the genocidal warlord Hekmeti in Sudan. They've supported them with material, and because they want access to gold mines that they currently have access to in the region. When that was going on, we suddenly started seeing the government, the Sudanese armed forces, they started using drones, FPV drones. And there was even one clip released online that seemed to show that one of the controllers had some Ukrainian writing on it. Now, where did that come from? Where did that come from? Now, and there's also some pictures of some guys that looked, pretty light-skinned for the region, but you never know. You never know. Nothing's 100% confirmed, and there's no way that the Ukrainians are going to confirm it during the war. Point is, we don't know if they got support from the Ukrainians or not, but either way, they are using FPV drones and drones more effectively now. As for there's no change in personnel, I don't know about that. I think, in Idlib, there has been some unification of forces in a common goal towards attacking the regime. They have established some of the tools and systems of governance there and administrating. Even if they're not the most effective in the world, they have established that, which is a lot more than what other Islamist organizations and jihadi groups have done in the past. And the attacks seem to be pretty coordinated. Now, am I saying that these guys are now super soldiers? No, but I do think that they used the last 4 years to prepare, the last 4 to 5 years to prepare and train. So I do think that the personnel remaining the same, I'm not so sure about. Some of them might have. Some of them probably have improved, and you've used the time. What does this difference mean for us? It threatens the loss of the aviation strike component, which constitutes about 75% of our forces' combat capabilities in the Syrian Arab Republic. The Khamenei air bases, The Khamenei Air Base is not a multi-story industrial facility with underground bunkers. It's essentially a field with lightweight prefabricated structures. Its operations would cease as soon as the enemy either comes within artillery range or reaches the range of drone strikes. At that point, using aviation maneuvering to mitigate threats, as we do on larger land theaters, will not work. There's simply nowhere to redeploy. Let me say that again. There is simply nowhere to redeploy. In essence, there are only 2 backup airfields left in Syria, which is a critical minimum. The situation with the naval base in Tartus is roughly the same. Again, the naval base in Tartus is on the coastline right over here. Right here. While it could theoretically be defended and held for quite a while, provided there are sufficient resources and personnel to do so, it may either become entirely non-operational or be limited to some very restricted functionality. Evacuating the bases is practically impossible. At best, most personnel, documentation, and serviceable aircraft could be relocated. Some mobile equipment could be crammed onto cargo and amphibious ships, but certainly not all of it. All other assets would remain at the bases. Resistance to drones is also meaning that they can get, at best, they can get most troops out, some documents out, you know, maybe burn some others. You know, at the end of like all the World War II movies where you see the Germans burning all the documents, that's what they're going to be doing. And some serviceable aircraft, but not everything. A lot of stuff would be left behind. Resistance to drones is also limited. This is due to the distance from big land, where supplies of missiles and air defense systems come from, and if it escalates to FPV drones. Thus, the main task for our forces in Syria is to prevent the enemy from reaching Latakia. For those of you who don't know where that is right over here, and it is the one area where the rebels haven't made too much gains. They made a little bit of gains, like over here. They've just crossed into like the region. This is all stuff that they've captured. But like, and I know that like, so, like the Turkestan Islamic Party is like, and that those are jihadist Islamists that have come from basically they're Uyghurs from China who not big fans of the Chinese and are Islamists, and they have come to Syria to fight against the regime. They're doing some attacks in the region, but we haven't seen any really big territorial gains, which is not too surprising considering, again, this is the Alawite heartland. Thus, the main task for our forces in Syria is to prevent the enemy from reaching Latakia, even if it means temporarily surrendering the rest of the country. Temporarily surrendering the rest of the territory. What does that mean? What does that mean, temporarily surrendering? Do they think that what's going to happen is that they're going to take over, the rebels take over everything. They then start making some settlement or some deal, or they have all this, and they're just going to like wait it out until the war in Ukraine is over and then launch a counteroffensive? Or are they going to do one during the war in Ukraine? I mean, if negotiations fall through in January, and Trump does that escalation of equipment that he's been talking about, I mean, what then? What then? But okay, temporary. So I guess they would be launching counteroffensives in the future. Oh, where were we? Theoretically, the approach is clear, but how it will play out in practice, we'll see soon enough. On the rapid advance of the enemy, there's no need to be surprised. It works both ways. In short, we'll keep observing, but it's impossible to deny that the initiative is not on our side and that the situation is very difficult. Here it is in the original text if you guys think the translation has any problems and you wanted to pause, screen cap, or read it yourself. But yeah, you know, Danny Haifong and all of the Syrian propagandists that came out and saying, oh no, don't worry. Who would have thought Scott Ritter, the convicted pedo who went to Chechnya to do propaganda for Kadyrov and was predicting the imminent collapse of the Ukrainian armed forces multiple times during the war, would end up not being that effective in predicting the outcome of this, because he's been unable to correctly predict the outcome of any battle at any time. And on his position was, don't worry, guys, Putin in Syria is going to destroy this offensive, and then the rebels are going to be busted up, and they'll retake everything, yada, yada, yada. And then they took Aleppo. And then not only they took Aleppo, they then went down and they took Hama. And now they're marching towards Homs. Now they rebelled in the south. Can someone be more wrong? Look, this is the problem. These guys are ideologically captured. They're here to root against the West in all ways from whoever. The same people who are fighting against the West right now in Al-Julani, that they're calling a jihadist, that they're calling Al-Qaeda, even though they're no longer Al-Qaeda, they've disassociated, and in fact, they actually fought with Haras al-Din, even if they do have some connections elsewhere. And every once in a while, when they act up, they kind of give America coordinates to, you know. But they are Islamists. These same people, if they were fighting against, I don't know, Israel, they'd be praising them. They'd be saying they're like, it's not that they want to have an Islamic governance that's a problem for them, because Hamas wants to have an Islamic governance. And if they saw Giuliani, like the interview that he did where he was like, I respect all of the minorities, they've been putting it all on every single social media channel, being like, yeah, look, see, Israel is fighting against somebody who stands for the unity of all peoples, but they stand for the history of the region, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's just that they're so ideologically captured, and they play this like a team sport, like a guy in the audience of a football game with their face painted with the team's colors, and no matter how bad the odds are, it could be the Browns going against like the I don't know, like the Philadelphia Eagles. The Eagles are gonna win, right? That's just the case. It could be Usyk going against some like mid-level heavyweight. It could be Usyk going against Deontay Wilder. Usyk's gonna win. But if they're on team Wilder, if they're on team Browns, if they're on team Assad, no matter what, it has to be, we're gonna win, because they're propagandists. But it's funny to watch, just like within 24 hours after they posted this video, Aleppo had fallen. And here's Syrian girl, everybody's favorite fascist, frequent guest on the David Duke podcast, big supporter of the Assad regime. And also, she's blocked me on Twitter because I'm such a mean guy. I'm so mean. Homes may fall temporarily. We will get it back. The anti-Lebanon mountains protect Damascus. Zionist accounts like Visegrad 24 will try to spread mass hysteria. Don't buy it. Steel yourself. This is going to be a meat grinder. Mind you, 24 hours before this, she said that they were about to retake Hama. And then like 24 hours later, it's, well, maybe Homs, the last major city till Damascus, will fall, but then the counteroffensive, don't worry, Steiner's counteroffensive will liberate Berlin, and we will put back the Red Army and see the Reich in flames, try to save Damascus in vain. It's the end of the war. That's the vibe I'm getting. Look, I'm not saying that's for sure, certain. Of course, if they somehow, push the PMF over the border, if they force Hezbollah to send thousands more, if Putin decides that actually, you know what, it's worth removing pressure from the Kursk offensive, it's worth removing pressure from our offensives in Donetsk to send more troops over to Syria to stabilize the situation, maybe, but none of these decisions seem particularly likely, because all of them work against other immediate interests that Assad has. And the Iraqi government continues to state that they don't want to they don't want to get involved. And that doesn't mean the Iranians can't be get involved anyway to these different militias. But, I mean, where are they going to go? They can't go through SDF territory. Would they go through Jordan and then go through these roads? But now the South's in revolt. How would you even resupply them? They get into Syria. Okay, you get 20,000 PMF boys into Syria. Good luck. Good job. They go through their ammunition clips. Are you going to airdrop the munitions in? And that's risky because guess what the Syrian rebels have also captured? Tons and tons and tons of anti-air equipment. I don't know how much of it they know how to use. I'm sure the stuff that's shoulder mounted is pretty simple. It usually has instructions on the side of it. But it just, none of this seems particularly practical. None of this seems, to be frank, particularly likely. What we're seeing right now is history in the making. We're seeing the Assad regime in its worst position since 2014. In fact, it is, in my mind, in a worse position since 2014. The city of Dara never completely fell to the revolution despite its status as the cradle of the revolution. Hama never fell to the revolution. The government stopped it from doing so. Assad. Aleppo, even though at certain points it was largely controlled by the rebels, was never completely controlled by the rebels as the country's second largest city. Deir ez-Zor was never captured by the SDF up to this point. These different bases up here, they've never been given up before. They're losing stuff they can't regain. They're not going to be able to, even if they stabilize the situation, they can't regain these. They can't regain, what are they going to do? A counteroffensive to Deir ez-Zor? American air power will stop that. You'll get a Battle of Kasham Part 2 Electric Boogaloo, it'll just be called Battle of Deir ez-Zor. Get curb stomped, to put it bluntly. The only area right now where the Assad seems to be actually holding the line is in these coastal regions, where we know they have the largest amounts of support. This right now is the Assad regime going through its worst throes, and we very well might see the Assad regime I was talking in private about them collapsing by the end of this year. I don't know if they'll last another week or two, but we'll see. We'll see. A lot of updates are happening. The situation is still flexible, and I do not want to get ahead of myself, but I do not see how the Assad regime covers from this. I see writing on the wall. Okay.